Some choices are not made with the mind. They are pulled out of the chest like a root torn from dry ground, painful, stubborn, and alive in ways you cannot explain to anyone who wasn't there. This is one of those stories. It happened in the high grass country where the plains breathe at night, and the fire smoke rises so straight it looks like it's trying to reach something. A story about a man who had everything a man could want in that world: power, respect, bloodline, future, and a woman who had nothing but her own 2 feet and the direction they chose to run. And a third person, pale as winter bark, sitting in the dirt of a war camp, who turned out to be the axis around which all of it would spin. You think you know this story. You don't. The war chief's name was Chaitin, which meant falcon, and he had earned it. He was not old, but he moved like a man who had outlived 3 versions of himself. His shoulders carried the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from having seen enough violence to stop being surprised by it. The tribe respected him the way rivers respect riverbeds, not by choice, but because there was simply no other shape for the water to take. His son, Takoda, was 22 summers old and built like the land itself, broad, patient, capable of sudden weather. The young men of the camp watched Takoda the way younger brothers watch older ones, looking for the instruction manual to becoming something worth noticing. He was not cruel. That mattered. In a world where cruelty was sometimes called strength, Takoda had figured out early that real authority doesn't need to raise its voice. The day Chaitin made the announcement, the whole encampment felt it before the words were spoken. The way the air changes before a storm, the way horses go still. Every woman of marrying age in the tribe could present herself. Takoda would choose. This was the war chief's gift to his son. Not land, not horses, not weapons. A future. The permanence of a good line continuing forward. The women knew what this meant. To be chosen by Takoda was not simply marriage. It was position, security, the kind of life where your children ate before winter became a problem. 3 of them had already been quietly fixing their hair differently for 2 weeks. What nobody anticipated was Sunkwa. She was not the most beautiful woman in the camp, though she was striking in a way that certain hawks are striking. Not decorative, not soft, but assembled with a kind of ruthless efficiency that made you look twice and then feel vaguely embarrassed for looking. She was the daughter of a midwife and a man who had died in a raid when she was 9. She had grown up watching her mother's hands, learning what they knew. By the time she was 15, she could set a bone. By 18, she could read a fever the way other women read weather. She was also, quietly, absolutely, relentlessly, her own person. The night before the presentation, her mother had smoothed her hair and said things mothers say when they are hoping their daughters will do the practical thing. Sunkwa had listened with the patience of someone who has already decided. She nodded at the right moments. She went to sleep without arguing. She was already planning. The prisoner had arrived 2 weeks before the announcement. He came with a raiding party that had traveled far west, further than the tribe usually pushed, in a country that smelled different and where the grass grew at a different angle to the sun. He'd been found half dead in a collapsed structure, some kind of outpost, a small settlement, already burning when the raiders arrived. They hadn't set that fire. Something else had. They brought him back because Chaitin had a policy about captives. They were information before they were anything else. This one looked like he hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 weeks. His clothing was strange, woven in patterns that nobody recognized. His hair was the color of dried corn silk, which caused considerable discussion in the camp. His eyes, when he was conscious enough to open them, were the gray of river stones after rain. He spoke in a language nobody understood. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that after 4 days of fever, he began picking up words. Individual ones at first, scattered like seeds thrown without aim. Then, within another week, full sentences. Imperfect, accented, sometimes structurally bizarre in ways that made children laugh, but functional. His name was Emmerich. He said it carefully, watching their faces while he said it, as though checking to see if the name itself carried weight in this new place, or if it would have to start from nothing here. It was starting from nothing. He seemed to accept this. Sunkwa had been tasked with checking on him twice a day. Not because she was ordered to. Her mother had that assignment. But because her mother's knees had started their slow, annual rebellion, and the prisoner's shelter was a walk that involved a slope. Sunkwa went without being asked. This was simply her nature. She walked toward what needed doing. The first 3 visits, Emmerich barely registered her. He was still climbing back from wherever the fever had taken him. By the 4th visit, he was sitting up, and He watched her check his bandaged arm with the focused attention of someone trying to memorize a process they might need to replicate alone later. "You know what you do," he said. His pronunciation was not quite right yet. The syllables arrived at slightly wrong intervals, like rain on a roof that's been patched unevenly. She didn't answer. She pressed along the edge of the wound to check the heat of it. The skin was cooling. "Good. I mean, it is skilled," he tried again. "You learned." "Everyone learns something," she said, and stood up. He thought about that for longer than she expected. She was already at the shelter door when he spoke again. "Who teaches you?" She paused. It was not a question she was asked often. People wanted to know what she could do, not the architecture of how she came to do it. "My mother," she said, and watching, and failing enough times to understand what not to do. She left. But the question stayed with her in a way she didn't examine too carefully, because examining it would have required admitting that she'd been asked something worth thinking about, and that would have required admitting something about the person who asked it. The morning of the presentation came. The camp arranged itself the way camps do for significant events, people finding positions that looked casual but were not. Every angle chosen to see without being seen to look. The women who were presenting had dressed with attention. The air smelled like sage and ambition. Sunkwa dressed simply. Her mother watched her from across the fire and said nothing because she had raised a daughter whose decisions arrived already built, with no scaffolding visible. Chaitan stood at the center of the gathering. Takoda stood to his right, easy in his posture, not performing anything, which was perhaps the most attractive thing about him. He wasn't trying. He had been raised in the presence of real power and understood that real power doesn't audition. The women came forward one by one. Takoda greeted each one without anything in his face that read as judgment. He had the kind of courtesy that was so natural it couldn't be called courteous. It was just the temperature of him. Sunkwa stood at the far edge of the gathering. She was present. She was looking at Takoda with the honest, measuring look she gave to problems she was trying to solve. He was a good man. She could see that from where she stood. A life with him would not be bad. It would be safe. Her children would eat. Her mother's old age would be cushioned. Her feet knew what they were going to do before she did. She turned. Not dramatically. Not in a way that was designed to be noticed. Though it was noticed because certain kinds of choices have a gravity that pulls attention before the mind processes why. She simply turned and walked, steady-footed, in the direction of the prisoner's shelter, which was at the far end of camp, away from the ceremony, away from the good sense of the thing. She was halfway there when she heard the voice behind her. Not Takoda, not Chaitan, her mother. Sunkwa. One word. The weight of an entire argument inside it. The weight of a woman who had worked her hands down to their essential bones to give her daughter options, watching that daughter walk away from the best one. Sunkwa stopped. She turned. Her mother was standing at the edge of the ceremony, hands at her sides. Old knees, tired eyes, face that had held its shape through things that should have unmade it. And something cracked open in Sunkwa's chest. Not grief exactly, not guilt exactly, but the specific ache of loving someone whose hopes for you are shaped like a room you cannot live in. She walked back, not to the ceremony, to her mother. She covered the ground between them and stood close enough that her voice wouldn't carry. "I know what I'm doing," she said. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that holds a whole life of reading a person's face. "I know you do," her mother said. "That's what frightens me." Sunkwa reached out and held her mother's hand. This hand that had caught so many new lives as they arrived, that had held so much grief as it left, that knew more about the human body than most medicine men would admit to knowing. She held it, pressed it once. "Let go. Trust the hands," Sunkwa said. "You taught me that." She turned again, walked again. This time her mother did not call out. The shelter was dim inside. Emmerich was sitting against the far wall, working on something with a short piece of carved wood and a blade they'd given him, small blade, the kind that said, "We're not afraid of you, but we're not stupid either." He looked up when she came in. His gray eyes adjusted to read whatever expression she was wearing. He said nothing, which was the right thing. She sat down across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and outside she could hear the sounds of the ceremony continuing, Takoda's voice somewhere in the distance, easy and unhurried. "You're not at the gathering," Emmerich said finally. "I'm here," she said. "Yes," he said. "I noticed." She looked at his arm. The wound was healing. In another week, it wouldn't need daily attention. In another 2 weeks, he would be a question the tribe had to answer. What do you do with a pale stranger who speaks your language now, who fixes things, who does not cause trouble, who seems to have nowhere to go back to? Your people, she said. Where are they? His face did something she'd learned to watch for. A stillness that was not peace. Gone, he said. One word. No footnote. She didn't push. She understood gone in all the ways it could be said. They sat in the shelter while outside the ceremony wound toward its conclusion, and the smoke rose straight in the windless afternoon, and somewhere a child laughed at something, the specific unguarded laugh of someone who doesn't know yet that certain moments are the last of their kind. The camp had a way of processing information. It was not quick, and it was not loud, but it was thorough, the way water is thorough, finding every crack, filling every low place, leaving nothing dry that could be reached. By the following morning, every person in the encampment knew that Sunkwa had turned her back on the presentation. By afternoon, the shape of the story had been tested and refined and handed from fire to fire until it had the particular smoothness of a thing that has been told enough times to settle into its final form. The facts, as the camp understood them. Chaitan's son had been offered his choice of women. The healer's daughter had refused to present herself. She had walked to the prisoner's shelter instead. She had stayed there long enough that it meant something, and she had come out with her face arranged in a way that meant something else. What people decided to feel about this depended entirely on who they were. The older women were divided. Half of them understood Sunkwa in the deep, wordless way that women understand other women who do the inconvenient thing, with a complicated respect that they would not name in public. The other half were frightened for her, which in that world looked almost identical to anger. The young men waited to see what Takoda would do, because Takoda's response would set the temperature of everything that followed. Takoda did something nobody predicted. He said nothing. He went about the following day with his usual unhurried competence, helped repair a section of fence, sat with the elders for their morning discussion, ate his food without performing grief or offense. If he was humiliated, he had folded it somewhere internal and refused to take it out in company. His father was another matter. Chaitan had not built his authority by being easily moved. He had also not built it by being careless about the things that held the tribe's social architecture together. A war chief's son publicly passed over, not by sickness, not by death, not by previous commitment, but by a woman who had chosen a pale stranger's company over the best offer the camp could make. This was not simply personal. It was structural. It said something about order and what happened when individuals decided the order didn't apply to them. He came to Sunkwa's family fire on the third day, not with warriors, not with volume, alone and quiet, which was more frightening than the alternative would have been. Sunkwa's mother offered him food. He accepted it, which was the correct thing. He ate it, which meant this was a conversation and not a confrontation. Sunkwa sat across the fire and watched him and did not look away, which was not defiance exactly, but was not submission either. Your mother, Chaitan said, is a woman this tribe cannot afford to lose. Sunkwa waited. You have her hands, he continued. Maybe her understanding of things. Maybe, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire moved between them. The stranger heals well? He does. Because of your work. Because of his body's will, she said. I only assisted. Chaitan was quiet for a moment. He turned the food in his hands. There are things a tribe can survive, he said, and things it cannot. He was not looking at her now. He was looking at the fire. I have not decided yet which kind of thing this is. He left without clarifying, which was its own kind of warning, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, that you carry around like a stone in a pocket, aware of the weight of it every time you move. Sunkwa sat with her mother after he left. The fire had dropped to coals. Her mother's hands rested in her lap, like two tired animals. He's not wrong, her mother said, about the tribe not being able to afford certain things. I know, and you're going back tomorrow. It wasn't a question. Yes, Sunkwa said. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word. It belonged to the space between acceptance and grief, that narrow, difficult territory where most of love actually lives. What Sunkwa was learning in the days that followed was not a language. She already understood enough of Emmerich words. What she was learning was the architecture of a person, the way someone is built on the inside, the load-bearing walls, and the rooms they keep locked and the windows they leave open. Emmerich was a carpenter, or had been. His hands remembered it even here. When he carved the small piece of which she'd seen him working on that first day, he moved with a precision that was automatic, not studied. The body knowing things the conscious mind has stopped thinking about. He told her about his settlement in pieces, the way you pick up rocks from a riverbed, one at a time, slowly, and you feel the weight before you decide whether to keep it. There had been 17 people, a small collection of families who had come west looking for the particular kind of silence that only exists when you're far from the world that keeps telling you who you are. They had built something modest and functional and real, the kind of community that works not because it's perfect, but because everyone in it has decided that maintaining it is worth more than being right about any individual disagreement. The fire had come fast. He'd been out checking a water line when it started. By the time he got back, he stopped there. Every time, the sentence never completed itself. She didn't push. She understood that some sentences end in the middle not because the speaker is hiding the rest, but because the rest does not have words yet, only wait. You didn't go back, she said once. Not a question. There was nothing to go back to, he said. And then I kept walking. Until you stopped. Until I stopped. She thought about her own kind of walking. The turning at the ceremony. The way her feet had known before her mind did. The way certain directions feel like instructions rather than choices. I understand that, she said. He looked at her. His gray eyes had a quality of attention that she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. Not intensity exactly, but presence. The feeling of being actually seen rather than assessed. I think you do, he said. Takoda came to the prisoner's shelter on a day when the sky had gone the color of an old wound. Not yet healed, but past the worst of it. He came alone, which was either courtesy or strategy or both. Emmerich was sitting outside the shelter working on a new carving when Takoda arrived. He looked up. The two men regarded each other with the careful attention of people who have understood correctly that they are significant to each other's story, without yet knowing exactly how. Sunko was not there. This was not an accident. Takoda had timed it. You speak our words, Takoda said. He sat down without being invited, which in that culture was either familiarity or dominance, depending on the posture it arrived in. His posture said neither. It was simply neutral, the way a man sits when he has decided to learn something. I'm learning them, Emmerich said. Still making mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Yesterday, I told your elder I thought his horse was ugly. I meant to say it was fast. Takoda looked at him for a moment. Then, something happened in his face that might have been the start of a smile that he hadn't decided yet to finish. Makwa is not wrong to be offended. That horse is not ugly. I know that now. Takoda was quiet. He watched the carving take shape under Emmerich's hands. A bird, rough-edged, but recognizable. What is that? A falcon, Emmerich said. And then, after a beat, I was told that word means something important in this camp. Takoda looked at the carving and then back at Emmerich. The almost smile resolved into something more complete. You are more aware than you appear to be. People think that often, Emmerich said. I find it useful. They sat together for a while after that. Not in silence, exactly. Takoda asked questions, the kind of questions that were information gathering dressed as conversation, which Emmerich answered with the honesty of a man who had nothing left to hide because he'd already lost everything worth hiding. About his settlement. About the fire. About where he came from before that. A town far east. A tray that had carried him out here. A family that hadn't followed. Because families sometimes sense in advance the shape of a person's need to go and stay behind to protect themselves from what that need will cost. When Takoda left, he stopped at the edge of the clearing and turned back. Sunkwa, he said. She is what she is. You understand what I'm telling you. Emmerich looked at him steadily. I think I do. Good, Takoda said. And then, in a tone that was both warning and something more complicated than warning, her value is not in who she chooses. It's in how she chooses. Don't misunderstand that. He left. Emmerich held the carved falcon in both hands for a moment before he set it down. The trouble, when it arrived, came from the direction nobody had been watching. There was a man in the camp named Hoka, older, not an elder, but positioned at the edge of that gravity, wanting in. He had spent 20 years accumulating the specific kind of influence that accumulates when real authority is elsewhere occupied. Not power exactly, the facsimile of it. Enough to move things a little. Enough to make certain people's days easier or harder, depending on his mood. He had wanted Sunkwa's mother for himself once, years ago. It had not happened. He had never quite forgiven the not happening, which he'd wrapped in more acceptable feelings and stored somewhere internal and taken out periodically to polish. He began talking about the prisoner. Carefully, the way a man who is experienced with influence starts things, by noting facts, reasonable facts, fact that could not be argued with, and arranging them in an order that did the emotional work for him. The tribe had mouths to feed. The territory was contested. A pale stranger sitting in the camp, eating their food, and learning their language was a liability that lovesick girls shouldn't be allowed to decide on behalf of the whole community. He didn't use the word lovesick. He used the word confused, which landed harder. The conversation spread, the way Hoka had intended it to spread. It found the people who were already uncertain and gave their uncertainty a shape. By the time it reached Chaitin's ears, it had grown into something that had to be addressed, which is exactly what Hoka had been building it toward. Chaitin sent for Sunkwa. She came to his fire the same way she came to everything, without performing calm, just being it, which was either the same thing at that level of composure or something beyond that. She sat. She waited. The camp is restless, Chaitin said. The camp is often restless, she said. About you. I know. He looked at her. You know why I haven't moved against you? It was not a question, but she answered it. Because I haven't done anything wrong. Because you haven't done anything wrong yet, he corrected. And because your mother's hands keep people alive. And because my son, he stopped. The fire moved. My son is not a man who needs a woman's choice made for her in order to keep his dignity intact. He made that clear. Takota is a good man, Sunkwa said. He is. Chaitin looked at the fire. The stranger is also not without quality. I have watched him. He is not a man who takes without working. He does not pretend to be more than he is. He turned back to her. This does not mean the camp will accept what you are building toward. What am I building toward? You know what you're building toward. She did. She'd known it from the moment her feet decided at the ceremony. The kind of knowing that is honest with you even when you're not ready to be honest with it. What would you have me do? She asked. Not surrender. A real question. She had respect for this man, even in opposition to him. Chaitin was quiet long enough that it became its own kind of answer. I would have you be careful, he said finally. With yourself. With him. With what your choices cost other people. He paused. I would have you be worthy of whatever you're deciding. She held that. I will be, she said. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he nodded once, not approval, not acceptance. The specific nod of a man who has acknowledged something he cannot stop and has decided to stand near it rather than in its path. She walked home in the last of the evening light, through the camp that was watching without watching, through the familiar smell of fires and horses and old grass, back to her mother's fire where her mother was already asleep, her hands folded in her lap like they were still holding something long after everything had been set down. Sunkwa sat by the coals for a long time, not thinking exactly, being very still in the specific way she was still when she was working out what her hands would need to do next. There is a specific kind of mourning that arrives after a decision has been made, but before it has been spoken aloud. A mourning that looks exactly like every other morning. Same sky, same smoke, same sounds of a camp shaking itself into wakefulness. But that carries a different density of air, as though the world has already adjusted to a new weight it hasn't been officially introduced to yet. Sunkwa woke into one of those mornings. She lay still for a moment listening. Her mother's breathing from the other side of the shelter, steady, deliberate, even in sleep, the breathing of someone whose body had learned economy over a lifetime of expenditure. The horses at the far edge of camp shuffling in the gray before light. A bird beginning something that another bird hadn't responded to yet. She got up and went outside. The fire was down to red breath, minimal but alive. She fed it a handful of dry grass and waited, watching the small flame decide whether to commit. It committed. She was already carrying the conversation she was going to have before she walked toward it. The words had been building in her for days the way weather builds. Not a decision to build, just the accumulation of conditions until the thing becomes inevitable. She knew what she was going to say. She knew she was going to mean it. What she didn't know was what he was going to do with it, because she had been learning him in all the ways you learn a person who has been reduced to their essential self by loss. And essential selves are the most honest and the most unpredictable versions of a person at the same time. The prisoner's shelter. The walk there was 22 steps through the waking camp. She counted them, not on purpose, but because her body counted things when her mind was elsewhere. He was awake. He was always awake before she arrived, which she had started to notice, and then stopped looking directly at, because looking directly at it required deciding what it meant, and she was not ready yet to make that particular set of meanings official. He had done something to the shelter. This was what she noticed first. He had straightened it. The interior reorganized with a carpenter's instinct for function, not decoration. Everything accessible. Everything with a purpose and a place. The carved falcon from a week before sat on a raised flat stone near the entrance, where the morning light would find it. She sat down across from him. He waited. He was good at waiting, the kind of good that says this is a practice thing, that there was a time in his life when waiting was what kept him outside the radius of danger, and the habit had stayed even when the danger changed shape. The camp is going to make a decision about you, she said. Soon. I know. It may not be a decision that keeps you here. He looked at her steadily. I know that too. She let a moment pass. What would you do if they decided? He thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Not the performance of consideration, but the actual thing. She could see him turning it over, feeling its edges. Walk, he said. The same way I came. You'd find something. I usually do. He paused. I found here. She looked at the falcon on the stone. You made that for him, she said. Not a question. I made it for the word, Emmerich said. I wanted to understand what a man names his son, whether the name fits. He picked it up briefly and set it back down. It fits. Takoda came to see you, she said. Yes. He said something to you when he left. Emmerich was quiet for a moment. He understood she wasn't asking what the words were. She was asking whether they had landed correctly, whether he had understood what was given and what was warned against in the same sentence. He told me, Emmerich said carefully, that the worth of you is not in the choosing. It's in the quality of the choice. And did you understand what he meant? I understood he was telling me that if I'm the thing you choose, I should be worth being chosen. That the responsibility is mine to carry, not yours to explain to anyone. She looked at him. The morning was coming in through the shelter door now, soft and gray, the kind of light that makes everything honest by making everything uncertain. You learn fast, she said. The language is easier when what's being said matters, he said. She nodded slowly. Then, my mother asked me last night what I know about you. Actually, no, not what I've observed. What I know. What did you tell her? That you came from 17 people, and you are the remaining one. That you build things and do not abandon them while they're standing. That when you don't know a word, you describe what it does instead of what it is. She paused. That you asked who taught me. He was very still. She said that a man who asks that question has a different kind of hunger than most. Sunqua looked at the fire ring at the center of the shelter, unlit, swept clean. She's not often wrong about people. Is she wrong about me? No, Sunqua said. She's not. The morning outside had fully arrived now. The camp was in motion, voices, movement, the particular percussion of a community beginning its day. Inside the shelter, it was its own country with its own weather, and the weather was very still and very charged, the kind that precedes not a storm but a clearing. I'm not making you a promise, Sunqua said. I'm making you a true thing. There's a difference. He waited. I turned away from that ceremony because something in me already knew the difference between a good life and the right life. I've known the difference since I was old enough to understand what my mother's hands were doing, that she wasn't healing people because it was safe or because it was expected. She was doing it because it was what her hands were built to do. She stopped, restarted. I'm not the same as my mother, but I have that same thing. What thing? The knowing, she said. What direction the hands want to go. He was quiet for a long moment. She waited without restlessness, which was a kindness. She was giving him the same quality of time she gave a wound that needed assessing, not rushing it toward a conclusion it hadn't reached yet. I had a woman, he said finally, back in the town I came from, before the settlement. She was good, kind, wanted the life that people are supposed to want. He turned the piece of carved wood in his hands. I left anyway, not for another person, just west. The need of it. He set the carving down. She knew I would. I think she stayed behind in part to save herself from watching it happen. Sunqua said nothing. She understood this was not a confession. It was a cartography. Here is the shape of the land I am. Here are the territories. Here is where it is rough. Here is what has already been traveled. I don't know how to be still, he said. I know how to build things, and I know how to leave, and those two facts have never managed to resolve each other into something peaceful. Nobody asked you to be still, Sunqua said. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to stop being what you are, she said. I'm telling you what I am, what I know, and what direction it points. The rest is yours to decide. Hoka moved on the 9th day. He went to 3 of the elder men, not Chayton, whose position he respected enough to route around, but the 3 who sat in the council, and whose combined weight could force a conversation that even Chayton would have to enter. He did not make accusations. He asked questions. The kind of questions that were accusations wearing the clothes of curiosity. Was a tribe's safety subject to one girl's feeling? Was a stranger's presence worth the cost of the instability it caused? Were there not precedents, good precedents, for how outsiders were handled, and were those precedents not the reason the tribe was still standing? The elders, to their credit, did not move immediately. They were old enough to know that moving immediately was usually the wrong speed. They called for counsel. The council was not a trial. In the structure of the tribe's governance, it was a conversation with authority, a place where things that had been floating informally were required to become formal and, therefore, manageable. Chaitin presided. Takota was present. Sunkwa was sent for, which was either an inclusion or a trap, depending on how the thing went. She came with her hands open. No weapons, which in context was both literal and symbolic. The elders asked their questions. Sunkwa answered them in the same register. She answered everything, directly, without embellishment, without apology. No, the prisoner was not a danger. Yes, she had formed a connection with him. No, she was not going to frame that connection as something other than what it was. Yes, she understood the tribe's concerns. No, she did not believe those concerns required the removal of a man who had done nothing wrong and provided what value he could in exchange for what he was given. Hokus spoke. He was careful. He was always careful, which was the most dangerous thing about him. He spoke about the tribe's future, about the integrity of its lines, about what it meant when a woman of the tribe turned away from her own people in favor of something foreign. Sunkwa looked at him while he spoke. She looked at him the way she looked at wounds, not with emotion, but with the flat, clear professional attention of someone deciding exactly what the problem is before deciding what to do about it. When he finished, she said, "You have described a threat that doesn't exist using words that sound like they're protecting something they're actually erasing." The council was very quiet. "The tribe's integrity," she continued, "is not held in who I stand next to. It's held in what we do when someone arrives with nothing, and we decide what kind of people we are." She looked at Chaitin. Emmerich has not taken anything from his camp. He has healed quickly and worked where he was allowed to work and learned the language, this language, with a seriousness that most born to it don't bother with. She turned back to the council. "If the question is what kind of people we are, I would like to know the answer also." Chaitin let the silence run for a long moment. The fire at the center of the council ring moved in its small, urgent way. "The question before this council," Chaitin said finally, "is not a woman's affection. The question is what this tribe does with a man who has no community and has committed himself in the ways available to him to contributing to ours." He looked around the circle. "I put that question to you." It took until late afternoon. The council did not move quickly. Quick movement was the style of young men, not wise ones. They went around the circle. Each elder spoke. Some were uncertain. One was against, and his against was honest and heard without hostility. Two were cautiously toward. The fourth, an old woman who said very little in councils, and therefore hit very hard when she spoke, said only, "The carpenter's hands built half the settlement's storage before it burned. I have seen what he's done in the 10 days he's been allowed to work. Judge a man by what he makes." When Chaitin rendered the decision, it was not a welcome, and it was not a full acceptance. It was a conditional continuation. Emmerich would remain. He would not be a prisoner. He would work. He would be watched, not with suspicion, but with the natural watchfulness a community applies to any new thing it hasn't fully learned yet. He would earn, over time, the right to the full trust that could only be given by a community to someone who had demonstrated they deserved it. It was not everything. It was enough. Sunkwa told him that evening. She sat in the same place she always sat and delivered the council's words plainly, without ornamentation, watching his face while she did. He was quiet when she finished. His hands were loose in his lap. "Conditional," he said. "Yes." "Time-bound." "Yes." "Fair," he said. She nodded. He looked at the carved falcon on its stone. "I've never been given a conditional acceptance before. I've usually been given a full welcome or a full door. What does the conditional feel like?" He thought about it. "Like a foundation," he said slowly. "Not a ceiling. Something you build on." She looked at him. The fire between them was low and steady. "That's the right answer," she said. Outside, the shelter of the camp was settling into evening. Somewhere near Chaitin's fire, the sound of talking, unhurried, the specific register of people who have been tense and have been given permission to be less so. Takota's voice among them, calm, the temperature of him unchanged, the same steady man he had been before the ceremony, and through it and after it, a man who had watched something he'd expected to have walk away from him, and had decided that the watching was not the end of his story, just a chapter of it. Hoka was quiet. He would stay quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that accumulates interest and comes back later in a different form. Sungkwa knew this. She had treated enough injuries to know that the ones that went quiet were not always the ones that had healed. Her mother was at the family fire, needing something, her hands doing the thing they could not stop doing, the endless useful motion of hands that had never learned to be still because the world had never stopped needing them. Sungkwa sat with Emmerich in the low fire and the conditional piece of a thing that was not finished but had found, for now, a place to stand. What happens next, he said, in a place like this? When something is conditional. You show up, she said, every day, until the condition becomes unnecessary because the answer is obvious. He nodded slowly. I know how to do that. I know you do, she said. The night came down over the camp like a hand over a lamp. Not extinguishing, just adjusting. The fires held their ground. The grass breathed its slow night breathing. The falcon on its stone held its rough wings in the half-dark, frozen mid-motion, going nowhere and already there.